Can we afford like a real thing? And we're in the butcher shop today, and we're gonna talk about the second most tender steak on an animal. Brent, what's the steak?
The flat iron, which comes from the chuck, beef shoulder, which is not the most typically sought after part of the animal. Heavily used muscles are usually not quite as tender, but deep inside there, we have a super tender, super delicious steak.
Turns out the flat iron is also one of the hardest things to actually butcher.
Good thing we haven't practiced in a while.
Yep, here we go.
Let's do it. This thing's heavy. Getting one hook in the rib, one hook in the shoulder, and here we go.
As you can see here on the chuck, this is where the neck is, so the head would be coming off here. This is actually right at the elbow, so the arm would be coming off there. And then our flat iron is buried right in here. Traditionally in the US, this is pretty much all going to burger grind or to braising or roasting cuts. That's it. It really wasn't until recently we started really breaking these things down to get some good steaks.
We have the ranch steak. We have the one-off of the shoulder tender, which is also a fantastic steak.
Yeah.
We have the whole chuck roll section, which we have Delmonico steaks, chuck steaks. Then you have a whole brisket as well. There's a ton of different things that you can seam out, but really only a handful of steaks.
And it's crazy when you read old books where it's just kind of like, you cut it this way, you cut it like that, and then you braise it. And that's pretty much all that there was to a chuck. None of the steaks Brent mentioned were like ever in books before like the mid-2000s.
In the industrialization of beef, your only tool was a bandsaw. So everything is just going to be cut very quickly and rudimentarily on a big saw because it's fast. We're going to get into it and just start butchering this chuck. So the first thing we're going to take off is just what's called the chain, which is on the inside of the vertebrae here.
One thing about the chuck is that it's often overlooked because this group of muscles is so important to an animal staying upright that it's just kind of assumed that all these muscles are just really tough.
What we do here at the meat hook is referred to as seam butchery. You can easily see where a seam is. And all you're doing is pulling that back. The only pressure I'm using is actually with my free hand. I'm not even really cutting, just guiding my knife to get through this separation. So the next section is one of the more difficult cuts of actually removing the entire spine. It's difficult because this is where the chuck roll, chuck roast are underneath. We want to preserve as much muscle as possible. We need to be meticulous about going bone by bone up the vertebrae.
This kind of butchery takes a lot of work and a lot of expertise, and that's why a lot of industrial producers don't really do this with a chuck. It takes a lot of skilled labor, which means a lot of money, to get to these smaller steaks that don't have the market value of, say, a ribeye or a porterhouse. So in 1998, there was actually a study done where two scientists were given $1.5 million to find like a new cut because the price of beef was so depressed they needed to find more cuts to sell in the market. And what they came up with after 3 years of research was the flat iron. It worked. Flat iron started showing up on shelves in your local grocery aisle. It started showing up on the menu at Applebee's. What a trailblazer. It's kind of mind-bending that like you could read books from like the 70s and 80s where they would tell you to buy a big piece of chuck and then seam out this beautiful steak. But it was just kind of unknown to the mass meat market until like the late 90s, early 2000s.
So the next thing we're going to do is to pull off the whole chuck roll. All the way from the neck through the ribeye steak is the same continuous muscle. So we're just going to pull that entire thing off right now. Next up, we are just removing the Denver steak.
Seam butchery, baby.
Being super careful right here because you can see that we're starting to come up against the bone. Here's our shoulder blade. Our whole flap comes off, trim that up, turn it into a Denver. That's not for this episode. Second to last thing, we have our whole brisket here. Trim.
Can't all be steaks, y'all. Some of it's got to be a burger. That part, we're gonna cut out. You don't want that.
Not burger.
That's what a gland looks like.
They're disgusting.
It looks like a really big booger.
Then we're going to take out our clawed heart, which is this whole section here.
This is where we employ the other kind of butchery, where we talk about seam butchery a lot, and it really, really is a useful tool and a way of cutting. This is just like trace the bone to get your muscles.
Last but not least is our flat iron. We just need to separate the actual shoulder blade here.
Good cut, good cut.
We do want to be super careful about everything else here that we are not going to necessarily nick. It's not a huge muscle, so we want to keep it big and as clean as possible.
Now we have our shoulder blade, and you can see how small this is, and we're gonna see how much smaller it gets. There's still some trim work that needs to happen here. Each animal only has 2 shoulder blades, and that means we only get 4 flat iron steaks per animal. It's really important that we don't mess these up. I'm gonna take off this steak first. So this hook is actually a pretty useful tool to just kind of like scrape along. You're getting all the meat off the bone, and you have a very clean bone that way. You can see as we get closer, it's not getting any easier. And believe it or not, actually the hardest part is still to come. So you have this flat side, but on this side, you have the bone coming up to a point here and going down here. The interesting thing when you get to this point is you would think, because these muscles are just separated by a very thin piece of bone, that they would actually have a similar taste or texture, and they actually have very different flavors in very different textures. Isn't butchering interesting? I'm gonna take off what's called the Scotch tender first. Don't let the name fool you, it ain't tender. This is it. Guys, we've been spending so much time just to get to this piece of meat right here. That's it.
But we made it!
We made it.
We're there!
Cabo! Brent, pretend that you're our meat scientist and you are shown this cut. What do you think? Is it going to be tender? Is it going to be tough?
I don't think you have any inclination that this is actually going to be a good steak by looking at it right now. Here, we have a lot of sinew, and then you can see an enormous piece of sinew straight in the middle. I'd be pretty quick to actually just chop this up and grind it because it does not seem like an easy thing to do.
So when we talk about sinew, we're talking about what is also called silver skin.
Just like gristle itself, it gets stuck in your teeth. It's what protects muscles and does separate them. You can't actually chew through it. You want to get to the muscle itself.
These are the fibers that in your body are helping, like when you do this, it's not just the meat moving, there's the connective tissue in between that are like pushing the muscles to move in this way or that way to all fit together for basic movements. That's what this stuff does. We're gonna start cleaning this guy up. I'm gonna start by taking off this sinew on top. And the name of this game is keep all the meat on the steak and your silver skin as clean as possible. This is the easy part before we get to the hard part. This is warm up. If you look really closely, you can see a grain. And when you're cutting silver skin, you always want to go with the grain. If you go against it, it just like will not ever come off cleanly. And this thick piece of sinew goes all the way through, but it doesn't just go through flatly, and it's not that thick. So it thins out, and it also kind of like waves down on each side, which is what makes this steak so hard to get to.
This is the hardest part because you can see the first half, but the second half is always like a wave, and it's different every single time.
This is sloping this way. That is moving that way. This grain's going this way. That grain is going that way. So it's a really, really difficult thing, and it's just getting so much thinner. It's very hard to trace this sinew, which is why we save it as almost one of the last things that a butcher ever learns here. Before we've even finished it, this is the amount of like sinew and a little bit of meat that I have already taken out of the flat iron. We don't really do anything with this. If you do something with this, let us know. I would love to learn how to be using all of this silver skin in a more productive way. We don't want to throw it out.
One thing that you actually might see in a grocery store is the whole flat iron cut into steaks horizontally like this, so it looks nice and lean, but it has a thick tendon running through the center of it. Makes zero sense why you would cut a steak that way if you like a really tender steak with an inedibly chewy part stuck in the middle, which is why we actually do separate it.
And there you have it. We'll still do a little bit more cleaning, but those are our 2 flat irons. If Brent had been working as fast as I know he can, breaking down a shoulder, it probably would have taken, what, 15 minutes to break the whole thing down?
Just to break it down, but then to clean the steaks usually takes about twice as long. So 10 to 15 minutes just to break that down, but then 10 to 15 minutes just to clean the flat iron steak.
That might be why it's not seen as a like worthwhile endeavor to get this steak. Butcher shops have been carrying it forever, but for the big meat market,
Not in an industrial system. When you're trying to move as quickly as possible, you're not going to take the time to seam this out. When you're taught to shop for steak, you're usually looking for intermuscular fat to equate tenderness. But when we're looking at a muscle, we actually want to look at muscle fiber. By looking at that, we can tell about how tender it's actually going to be.
yeah, they're actually both really good indicators, but we're always taught fat is flavor, but that's not the whole story.
In an industrial system, fat is the only thing that really does carry flavor, but for pasture-raised animals, the muscles that do the work carry a ton of flavor, but sometimes they're actually just lean.
Teach us about muscle fibers and what you're looking for.
The easiest way to tell the difference between muscle fibers is to look at something like the fillet, which does zero work and has very small muscle fibers, almost indistinguishable. Flat iron, right next to it, is also very, very similar, but we're not looking at a cross section. But then if you look at something like this piece of trim, we have huge muscle fibers here. And by looking at that distinct difference, you can tell this is not going to be tender. This definitely is. So why would our flat iron actually be tender?
It's not that hard working, but it's getting all the flavor from being grouped into a large group of muscles that are doing a lot of work. Just by virtue of being in the shoulder, being used 24 hours a day by the animal, it's building up a lot of flavors. The fillet is the most tender muscle on the animal from a scientific perspective. It is the most tender. The flat iron, from a scientific perspective, is the second most tender muscle on the animal. It has so much more flavor, but it's a fraction of the price.
The customer's coming in for the first time. I went to a whole animal butcher shop. I want to try something new.
Yeah.
They think, oh, I got to get the most expensive thing. That's going to be the best thing. You don't have to. Talk to your butcher. Let us make a recommendation, because this is a better value and almost absolutely foolproof. You're going to be super happy with it. And if you overcook it a little bit, okay, it's still going to be fantastic. Great day for outdoor grilling. Our grill is hot. We're ready to go. Hot and fast. We're cooking for maybe 6 minutes. Get as rare as we can.
It's hot out here. It's hot down here.
It's hot everywhere.
It's hot everywhere. Like we said earlier, this steak has a lot of flavor, so we're just doing salt and pepper.
We're cooking this directly over the coals, which a steak that has a lot more fat to it is gonna drip, it's gonna flare up, you're gonna have to move it around a little bit. We flip this once in 3 minutes, we're almost done. You literally cannot mess it up.
And don't get it twisted. You don't always need fat. Fat equals flavor, but it ain't everything.
Caramelize both sides. Feels done. I think we're there.
Our steak is rested. It feels very nice.
Oh, wow. That is super tender, but still has more texture than a filet.
Yeah.
But the flavor is just absolutely phenomenal. It's beefy. It's got a little bit of that minerality from the grass.
Any steak that you can just kind of pull apart like this, yo, that texture is gonna be dope.
That's tender.
That's gonna be tender.
That's tender.
Where does this rank in your like steak power rankings? Top 5, top 10?
Top 5. This is such an amazing like weeknight meal. Good with absolutely anything. I could never really get tired of this.
Yeah, agree.
If you like filet mignon, but you want a more flavorful but cheaper option, Flatiron's the way to go.
That's your huckleberry.
I'm your huckleberry.
Oh, that's my huckleberry.
Does that make me?
Have a good night.